I'd like to call the February 9th, 2016 Public Works Board to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Fritsch?
Here.
Mr. Shar?
Here.
Mr. Pickard?
Here.
Mr. Reich?
Here.
Mr. Temperley?
Here.
Mrs. Wolf?
Next on the agenda, correction and approvals of minutes. We have actually 3 listed here. I gotta get to my other thing here. Well, it was our November regular meeting. December was with the Plan Commission regarding our electronic packets, and then January was the work session. So 3 sets of minutes. Would anybody like to make a
approve all
motion?
3 sets?
Or if you want to do them separately, you can. If you want to do all 3 at once.
Let's do all 3 at once.
Anybody want to make that motion?
I will move that we approve all 3 minutes as presented.
I'll second the motion.
Motion and second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Item-
Mr. President, I abstain.
Okay. I didn't, yeah. Very good. Item 4, questions and public comment. Seeing none. Item 5, discussion recommendation on wastewater impact fees. And in our packet was a impact fee study. Hi.
Good evening.
John Cameron from Ellers. He been working with us before. Okay.
Yep. So I was the one who put together the impact fee document that you have before you. Just to start with a little bit of background, and then I'll just kind of go through generally the highlights of the study in terms of how the fees were arrived at. But impact fees, if you're not familiar, are one-time fees that are primarily paid at the issuance of a building permit for the purpose of funding new, expanded, or improved public facilities, capital costs, so brick and mortar type facilities, necessary to serve new development. So the impact fee on the sewer side is not a new impact fee. You have a sewer impact fee that's currently in place. It's really an update of that fee, and that's the purpose of this document. Impact fees, this particular impact fee study is really based upon the wastewater system needs assessment that was done in 2014 by Strand, and really takes off from there in terms of what they were projecting for population growth within the Seward area, and then the facilities that are recommended in that impact fee study. Impact fees themselves are governed under statute 66.0617, and what the statute requirement is, whether you're putting a new impact fee in place or you're amending or updating the study like what we're talking about this evening, is to go through what's called a public facilities needs assessment. And that public facilities needs assessment requires you for each facility, so in this case just for the sewer system itself, to take an inventory of the system to identify any deficiencies in the system itself. So if you think about it, you're constructing new facilities or improved or expanded facilities, anything that you're constructing to address an existing deficiency, really, if there were no more growth that happened, would you still have to kind of do this project? If the answer is yes, and we're talking deficiency, that cost does not get put onto the impact fee. The costs that we're talking about are those costs that really are driven entirely by new development. So as part of the study, we have to identify what those deficiencies are, what those new facilities that are going to be recovered through impact fees are, and then do the deficiency growth analysis that I'll talk about here in a few minutes to identify of those new facilities how much is recommended to serve new development and therefore recovered through the impact fee. So the impact fees themselves, as you collect them, they go into segregated accounts, one for each impact fee, and they can only be used for the facilities that you say you're going to use them for in the impact fee study document. In terms of generally how the fee is calculated, really what we're looking at is population growth. In this case, we're going out through the year 2030, so approximately a 15-year time period. Generally, when you do impact fee studies, you're projecting out 15 to 20 years for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the facilities themselves are going to be in place for a long period of time. And number two, if you do have to debt finance these facilities, which we're talking on the sewer side, some potentially larger assets, you're debt financing it roughly over that same 15, 20-year time period generally. So we're projecting out population growth, we're identifying those growth-related facilities, and then really we're dividing our cost, our facility cost related to growth by our population growth to arrive at an impact fee. In the case of sewer, just to kind of walk through a couple of pages from the study, if you happen to have that handy. If you look at page 9, which is the a map, one of the major changes that this study makes is to deviate from a citywide impact fee to different impact fee zones. And the zones are highlighted in the different colors. So you have a blue zone, a purple zone, a red zone, a yellow zone, and then there are some minor costs related to infill development that's not associated with any one of those zones. And there's kind of a citywide or a system-wide cost really associated with some of the recommended improvements from the Strand study at the wastewater treatment facility. But the statute allows the city to either collect impact fees citywide, or if the rationale is that the improvements that are recommended in the study really benefit only specific portions of, in this case, the sewer service area, you're allowed to create these different impact fee zones, with the rationale being that it's as fair as you can possibly make it, that those who are causing the costs are paying the costs, and that if I'm in, say, the blue zone, I'm not paying for something that's down in, say, the purple zone, and vice versa. Okay, and what you may have seen from the study too is that there are some facilities that benefit multiple zones, and they're shared, that they're costed out proportionately in terms of the impact fee calculation. But the methodology is still that we have these different impact fee zones to try to be as fair and precise as we possibly can be. If you look at the next page, and that just ties back to the map, the impact fee itself is based on the size of the meter. So when you pull a building permit and you identify the size of the water meter, that's what the impact fee is based upon. So really what we're looking at is number of equivalent meters of growth. And we're equating it back to, say, a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch meter. So really, kind of that single family home, for example. So it may be that a commercial business, a wetter commercial business, could have a 2-inch meter, which would be a couple times larger from a water usage standpoint than a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch meter, but it all equates back to how many 5/8 or 3/4 inch meters do we have coming in over the next 15-year period. And what the Strand study identifies is approximately just under 1,200 equivalent meters. So as part of this study, what we did was we went through each of these different impact fee zones and identified the amount of growth, allocated that 1,186 equivalent meters to each of those impact fee zones. And then you have growth outside those 4 zones, which is really that infill development. If you look at the next page, page 11, what you see is the deficiency growth analysis for the new sewage facility. So Generally, we have it broken down into 3 different categories: the wastewater treatment facility, the interceptor facilities, and then pumping station facilities. So in total, from that study, we've got about just under $3.5 million worth of costs that we're looking at as potentially impact fee eligible. From that, a deficiency growth analysis was done, where essentially we're looking at how much flow or capacity do we have, existing capacity do we have at each of these facilities, which the Strand study does an excellent job of identifying, and then what is the capacity flow that we anticipate out through the year 2030. So we're essentially dividing our existing flows divided by what we expect to have in 2030. So essentially what we're identifying from a percentage standpoint is how much with these facilities are you oversizing them to serve new development in the future, okay? So what you see at the bottom of the sheet, and each facility that's listed in the study has its own deficiency growth calculation. But when you get to the bottom, really what you're looking at is about 32% of that just under $3.5 million is impact fee eligible. The rest is deficiency, okay? And when you have a system like this, that's what you would expect to see is more on the deficiency side in terms of this is what we need to maintain our system, and growth being a smaller percentage of it. When you're looking at, going into a completely new area and putting in large mains, generally that's the responsibility of the developer itself that's going into that area. If you have larger regional facilities that are going in totally to serve a new area, then you might see more of like 100% growth, but in this case, that's really not the nature of these types of facilities, particularly at the wastewater treatment facility. Really there, you're looking at, things you'd have to do regardless, the influent pumping costs as well as the UV disinfection system, and really growth is contributing a smaller share of that because their flow compared to how much existing flow you already have is a smaller percentage. So that's how you arrive at these percentages. From there, page 12, and I won't really go through it, shows the actual calculation, which is really the percentage allocated to growth times the total cost of the facility to get to that impact fee share, and then divided by the number of equivalent meters from that previous table that we went through in each of those zones. But if you jump to page 13, what you can see is the summary of the recommended sewer impact fees by impact fee zone, as well as by meter size. And then on the far right-hand column, you can see each different zone compared to the existing impact fees that are in place right now. So right now, the impact fee for really up to a 1-inch meter is $1,928, and that's across the system. It's irregardless of area. So from here, you can see it divvied up by different zone. And really, most zones, really every zone except that blue zone, the fee is going down. The blue zone fee is going up. That's because you have relatively smaller amount of growth projection and larger amounts of cost assigned to that zone. So that's how the math works out. If you're outside of any of these zones and you're more of an infill development, the fee is relatively minor. It's at $96 for a 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter, and then it goes up from there. So you can see the comparison between zones on that page. Really, the last thing to point out, and it's also required by statute under the needs assessment, is to look at the impact that these fees have on housing affordability. And that's shown really on the last page of the study, which is on page 15, table 7. And what we've got, and really the purpose of this in terms of having it within the statute is to recognize that the impact fee is static. It does not vary based on the value of a home. So if you were to look at a new house that, say, costs $200,000 to build compared to a new house that costs $400,000 to build, The impact fee obviously is going to be a bigger percentage of the overall cost of a $200,000 home compared to a $400,000 home. So what this final table shows on page 15 is we're looking at a $300,000 house in terms of new construction, lot and home, and then looking at the different zones. If you had no impact fee, looking at the existing impact fee, and then the proposed impact fee, assuming you put 10% down at existing interest rates, how much would you have to finance? And then what would your monthly mortgage payments be kind of under those three different scenarios across the zones? So you can kind of compare the difference between, if you didn't have any impact fees, and again, this is all of your impact fees, so this isn't just sewer. It also includes water, parks, and then the senior/community center impact fee as well. Across the zones, and that's a requirement under statute. So, generally the impact fees themselves, in terms of an increase to a monthly mortgage payment, is relatively minor. I guess the old saying in terms of development is it's the three L's: location, 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 and that's really what drives development. So, any questions?
I got some questions on the zones, like the red zone and the yellow zone. Why are those two different zones? Look, one zone with just I-94 running through it.
The yellow zone is on a lift station that probably will drain down North Main Street in the future. The red zone is, most of the red zone is either gravity flow or on a lift station located right here. Some of this flows into a lift station right here somewhere, doesn't it? But this area here has already seen some upgrades. This one here probably wouldn't impact this line. It's probably going to impact North Main Street. And so that's why it was selected as a different zone.
And another lift station.
All right.
My question on the purple zone was, there's a lot down at the south side. It really, I can see lots of growth potential down there on where it's essentially farm field now, but it also goes up the inside of the lake where I'm not a city expert, but it doesn't seem to me like there'd be any growth potential there. It's all exists already.
There's probably not any growth potential there. It's kind of like in this blue zone over here, or any one of the zones. If you already live there and your house is there, you don't pay anything.
Right.
So if you're looking at what we have to do, though, is look at it and say, this is the area where the improvement is occurring. And so the likelihood that there would be some in here is pretty limited, but it's still the potential that if something did occur here, it would be that was new, they would have to pay the impact fee.
Because it impacts, because it
It has a different impact.
it feeds into a physical facility that feeds into the same area as that southern area.
Right. Well, what we do is we look at a facility improvement, and this area here has a facility improvement. It's all tied to the same facility improvement. The chances that there would be significant new development in this portion of it are not relevant, but we're not considering that. We're considering this area here as an improvement. If for some reason there is something that occurs in this area that would require a new sewer service, they would have to pay the impact fee because they are part of that improvement.
Does that answer the question, John, or
That's
not?
my question, is that it seems like that there's nothing that can go in there.
Well, that's not true. We've seen things where lots have been subdivided, or there have been other types of improvements that change. They tore down a single family home and they put in a zero lot line. So now you have two services instead of one. So we have to designate it by the service area, not the likelihood that there would be a new expansion. Because there is the outside chance that this area here could see some type of change where a lot would have to pay an impact fee. The likelihood is that these areas out here are going to see most of it,
Yep.
but
I get what you're saying, though. So in the part of the zone that touches the lake there would be very,
unlikely.
but very high probability that someone might come in and purchase a home, tear it down, and build another one.
No, see, that's not a new impact.
That is not new impact.
No, but let's say they came in and they tore down a couple big homes and they went to to apartment buildings. You know, we could see 3 houses on South Main Street come down and they would build apartments. So you go through from 3 single-family homes to an apartment building that had 8 or 12 units. You now have an impact that has gone from 3 to 12, so you would have 9 new impacts.
Okay.
And so those are the things that we have to watch out for. So when we're looking at this improvement in this area, this whole area is impacted by that improvement. This area may not see any changes, but if it does, the impact fee does apply to that. And so that in that type of situation, we've seen some houses that have really big lots and they decide to subdivide into 2 lots. Now there's a potential for a new house to be built in that zone, even though it didn't look like there was any chance. And so that lot has to pay an impact fee when the house is constructed. And so we've seen areas in the old part of the city here that you would anticipate didn't have to pay any impact fees. Well, let's take a situation when the old shoe factory added 7 apartments to it. That went from 1 impact to 8. So those are the kinds of situations that we have to watch for.
Any other questions?
And the state requires us to be fair across the board on all that. Be nice to just ignore this area, but you can't.
I noticed that among all the zones, the spread between impact fees, the stuff that's outside of any declared zone is $96. And then in one of the zones, it's actually almost $3,900, almost a factor of 40 to 1 difference between impact fees. Is that customary, or is that an odd circumstance? Do you see that a lot?
Well, I think a lot of communities actually just have what you currently have in terms of a citywide or service area wide fee. But amongst zones, they do differ, and that's really kind of the point. Is that you're saying these costs are really regulated to a specific zone. The infill, any development not associated with any of these zones, generally it's either infill or like it's the situation that you guys talked about in terms of going from, tearing down and going a little bit larger. In which case, all these other zones are really, there's specific collection system projects associated with them. There's no specific collection system project, either pumping station or interceptor associated with any of the infill zones that really benefits new development. So we're really just talking about what's happening at the treatment facility.
So I think you answered my next question. I think the funds that are calculated for each zone, you said that those are dedicated just to that zone?
Well, the sewer, what the statute requires is that sewer in general stay in one fee. But yeah, because now with the zones, you realistically have to, you don't have to as part of the statute, but realistically kind of keep track of where you're collecting it within each zone so that you know which projects you're going to start applying it to.
Let's back up a little bit though, because in the blue zone, you have the $96 fee, you have the red zone fee, and you have a blue zone fee, which creates the total. So we have a certain amount that goes to improvements that would be in the blue zone, a certain amount that would be in the red zone, and a certain amount that are just wastewater treatment plant associated. So we have to kind of keep track of those and make sure that each one is applied appropriately. Vice versa, when you hit a certain time period, we've been collecting these impact fees for a number of years. Conditions have changed significantly in that time period, so we haven't spent any impact fees on, not a significant amount of impact fees in the 15 years that I've been here. So we rebate those. So not only do we have to know what zone they come from, we have to know who owns the house at the time we come to rebate it.
Sure.
So, while we collect them and we would utilize them for the improvements, if we don't get those improvements done within a certain time period, we have to rebate that. So we have to know how it plays out. So we have not only what zone the improvement would be for, but, you know, where the location it was, so that in case we have to rebate, we know that.
Okay, I think that kind of feeds into my last question, which is the growth estimates, the equivalent meters. That's, in many ways, that's just kind of a wild guess. What would happen if, like, in the purple zone, where I see there were 334 meters estimated, what happened if there was just growth, great guns growth down there, and you got 600 or 700? Does that impact fee that's charged continue at that same rate, or does a proration change, or do you start to rebate, or what?
No.
I
We
mean, you might even
continue
need
to
to-
collect the fee.
You might need to double your
And-
equipment, right?
Once the equipment is paid for, the fee comes off. So it's kind of, you know,
Right.
your statement is kind of correct. We did an estimate based on between the growth that we've actually seen and what the state is projecting. And we've taken the best guess, but it's still a wild, hairy guess.
Sure.
But if we ramped up and said there was going to be a lot more, you just pay it off faster. If the growth is a lot slower than you anticipated, then you collect a lot longer. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We did the best we could in making a determination. John and Brandon and Dustin and I spent a lot of time going over all the analysis and all the different documents that we've used over the years and what we've seen as far as growth prior to, since 2006 and on. Probably as an overall statement, we're probably growing as fast as any community in Jefferson County at this point in time. But that's still not anywhere near what it was back in 2003, 2004. So we ramped it way back, and I think we even selected a lower rate of growth in the town, because there's a certain amount of difficulty in expanding out there. But that being said, 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. I see that some of the equipment or some of the funding goes to replacing existing equipment. Like in the blue zone, replacing discharge interceptor PS13, that type of thing. Is that customary as well? Why isn't that just a maintenance?
Is that an increase of capacity?
Right.
Well, when we replace it, he went over that, the deficiency stuff. If you look at the total cost versus what the impact fees are actually paying for, it's pretty minor. So while it's a replacement, we're upgrading it. So there are certain sorts of changes that are being implemented into the system as a whole that have affected the costs that are growth related.
Right.
And that's what John tried to discuss is that impact fees pay for the growth related stuff. The deficiency stuff, which is the maintenance, is part of the fees.
Right, so essentially you have, new capacity that's being added to these types of facilities. There was at least one facility in here that we had that was in the Strand study that really we ended up taking out because it was 100% deficiency as we looked at it, so.
So where it says interceptor replacement, is that a capacity increase, replacing it with a larger pipe?
Right,
Okay,
But the fees have to pay for,
just the increase.
right,
well, the impact fees pay for just the increase.
Right.
Just the
The
increased part.
billing, the water and sewer fees, or the sewer fees pay for the regular water, sewer billing pays for the basic size, and then any increase in that capacity is contributed to by the impact fees. So if you had an 8-inch and you went to a 10-inch, 2 inches is impact fee.
So this requires a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, well, that's what the state did. They came in and they went through a whole process of how to make it happen. The debate is, and will always be, you could incorporate the growth into the sewer rates. So the people who've lived here for a long time, they're gonna pay to fund the growth. Or you can use impact fees, and then you get a lower monthly wastewater bill, and the people who move in and build a new house next to you, they fund that portion of the increased capacity requirements. And that's the way the city's opted to go since 1995, 6. It tends to be a little bit fair, but John hit on probably one of the key issues in the debate is house affordability and how it impacts homes. Now, most of the homes that are being built on the blue zone aren't going to be impacted significantly, but there are portions in the blue and the red area that could be significantly impacted by that. So you can't ever make it perfect. We've gone through and we've done the best we can. We've done a lot of analysis. We've done a lot of paperwork. It will continue to be a lot of paperwork, but I think in the long run, we believe that it's worth it.
Wait, is there an increase in paperwork since from before or the same?
Is there an increase in paperwork in statutory requirements, John?
Unfortunately, yes.
Huge.
Really, since 2006 was one of the bigger law changes in terms of time frames for refunding, and it was made much more complicated.
Any further questions? If not, would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve our prepared motion 16-2-1.
Anybody care to make a second?
I'll second.
Motion and second to approve 16-2-1. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Pickard?
Aye.
Mr. Reich?
Aye.
Mr. Temperley?
Aye.
Mrs. Wolf? Aye. Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Very thorough study.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good day.
Good night.
All right, next is number 6, recommendations for future agendas.
We'll have, next time will be a work session again at 6, right?
We are heading down the work session route until June, when we have
Okay.
the new capital improvement plan kicked out.
Is there anything coming up in the future that impacts this board that you can think of that we need to talk about? Anything with the electric utilities or?
I mean, we've awarded a contract, but that's just work we've had in the capital improvement plan for years. So I don't. What about taking down the substation? But that's still work that's already contracted. We just need to get it done.
How about mentioning that? Yeah, so we just for for our information.
Yeah, Paul can talk about it. Just a report on
Yeah.
the utilities activities.
Anything coming up with the roads and so on that we forget about and you guys are dealing with. And
Not that I
Keep
want to talk about in public.
what?
Not that I want to talk about in public.
Oh, okay.
Anything else? Okay, if not, then I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.